All right, get ready to have your minds blown because today we're going deep, deep into Viking culture.
Ooh, Vikings.
And trust me,
Already.
it's not what you expect.
Like,
We're taking a look at this article. It's called The Pretty Boys of the Middle Ages, Vikings.
okay.
And
Question mark.
let's just say it
Liquid.
really challenges those assumptions about Vikings being all rough and tumble.
Right.
Think less barbarian hordes and more? Well, you'll see.
It's fascinating how these stereotypical images persist, for centuries.
Right.
I think we tend to box historical figures into very simplified narratives.
Yeah,
And I think this deep dive will help us understand the nuances
absolutely.
of Viking culture a little better.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay, so let's unpack this.
Go.
We've all seen the classic image of a Viking,
Right.
right? Big and burly with an unruly beard, probably hasn't seen soap in weeks.
Right.
But what if I told you that that's about as accurate as a flat Earth map?
Well, the article makes a strong argument for reconsidering how we view, Viking culture.
Okay.
It encourages us to move beyond that very limited barbarian lens and examine the evidence
Right.
that points to a society that really valued personal appearance
Okay.
and grooming.
So Vikings were into fashion.
It seems so.
That's
Yeah.
not something you hear every day.
Right.
What kind of evidence are we talking about here?
Well, for starters, hairstyles played a really significant role in Viking culture.
Okay.
It wasn't just about aesthetics. It was a powerful social signal.
Interesting.
For example, slaves were often forced to keep their hair very short,
Right.
almost like a badge of their status.
Oh, wow.
Different professions may have preferred certain styles,
Uh-huh.
A warrior might choose a braided style that wouldn't get in the way during battle,
Right.
while a wealthy merchant might have gone for a more elaborate,
Right.
decorated look to display their wealth.
I see. So it wasn't just a free-for-all.
Yeah.
There was like a system to it.
There was an element of personal choice, of course,
Right.
but hairstyles were definitely a way to communicate your place in society.
I see.
And it goes beyond just hair.
Okay.
Archaeologists have discovered all sorts of grooming tools from that era.
Like what?
Tweezers, combs,
Okay.
even ear scoops.
Wait, ear scoops?
It seems so.
So you're telling me they were meticulously cleaning their ears
Uh-huh.
while sporting those stylish braids?
It appears that way.
That's amazing.
You might think ear scoops are a bit much.
Yeah.
But it just goes to show how dedicated they were to hygiene.
Yeah.
This completely shatters the image of the dirty, unkempt Viking
Hold up.
we often see in movies, right?
It really does.
Yeah.
Okay. This is already blowing my mind.
That's pretty amazing.
Stylish hairstyles, dedicated ear cleaning.
Right.
What else? Did they have like Viking barber shops?
Maybe not barbershops as we know them,
Right.
but the level of grooming suggests some serious effort went into their appearance. And here's where it gets really interesting.
Okay.
Vikings were also big fans of hair dye, both men and women.
What?
They used a strong lye soap to bleach their hair blonde.
Hold on, blonde.
Blonde.
Was that considered the ideal look back then?
Well, it's hard to say for sure,
Yeah.
but it's interesting to consider why they would go to such lengths
Right.
to lighten their hair.
Yeah.
Maybe they associated blonde hair with beauty or status, just like some people do today.
You're right.
Or maybe it was a way to emphasize their cultural identity. There's evidence that Celtic men reddened their hair.
Oh, wow.
So there was definitely a cultural element to hair color at the time.
Yeah, it makes you wonder, was it a conscious choice to lighten their hair?
Yeah,
Or simply a side effect of washing with lye soap that they just decided to embrace?
that's a good question.
Yeah.
It's possible they liked the effect and just went with it.
Yeah.
Either way, it challenges our modern assumptions about hair coloring being a recent phenomenon.
Right.
Clearly, people have been trying to change their hair color for centuries.
That's wild.
Yeah,
So they were dedicated to their grooming routine.
it seems so.
Was this like a daily thing? Did they have like ancient Viking salons?
Well, maybe not salons, but remember how we talked about hair washing being a thing?
yeah.
Lurgard, the Viking word for Saturday, translates to washing day. This weekly ritual shows how much they valued cleanliness.
Wow. Weekly washes.
I know, right?
That puts them way ahead of some other cultures at the time.
Yeah.
In fact, the article mentioned that the Anglo-Saxons who had, adopted Christianity and its less frequent bathing practices were quite shocked by the Vikings' cleanliness.
Yeah, it's a fascinating contrast.
Yeah.
Imagine these Anglo-Saxons.
Right.
Seeing these barbarians coming in with their weekly baths and their fashionable haircuts.
Yeah.
It must really challenge their preconceived notions.
It's like they were inadvertently starting a hygiene revolution.
You could say that.
I love it.
There are even accounts from John of Wallingford, an English chronicler, who lamented that these well-groomed Danish men were quite a temptation for English women, even blaming them for disrupting marriages.
So these Vikings were not only stylish, but also irresistible.
It seems so, at least according to John of Wallingford.
Okay, but I'm guessing there's more to them than just good looks and good hygiene.
Absolutely. We've been focusing on their outward appearance.
Right.
But there's a whole other side to Vikings that often gets overlooked.
Okay.
They weren't just warriors and, groomers. They were also poets.
Poets?
And storytellers with a great sense of humor.
Viking poets.
Yeah.
Now that's something I need to hear more about.
Right.
What kind of poetry did they write?
Well, Professor Judith Jesch, who wrote Viking Poetry of Love and War, points out that poetry was a big part of Viking culture, and love was a popular theme.
Interesting.
Apparently, they also had a good sense of humor.
Okay, so they could woo with words as well as good looks.
It appears so.
Do we have any surviving examples of Viking love poems?
Well, some poems were more on the silly side.
Okay.
For instance, the poet Egil Skallagrimsson
Okay.
wrote a poem where he complains about getting old.
Okay.
Saying things like, I've got a crick in my neck and my hearing's gone.
Not exactly romantic.
Not exactly romantic, but definitely funny.
I can just imagine that being recited in a mead hall.
Right.
That's hilarious. Yeah. Were there any, smoother Viking poets out there?
Oh, absolutely.
Ones who could, charm the ladies?
Take Ingolf, for example.
Okay.
There's a poem about him being so popular with the ladies, young and old, that even the grandmas wanted a piece of him.
No way.
It shows their playful sense of humor and how they weren't afraid to poke fun at themselves.
So we have clean-cut,
yeah,
poetic Vikings with a sense of humor.
That's right.
This is definitely not the image I had in mind.
Yeah, it challenges our perceptions, doesn't it?
It really does. But I have to say, it's refreshing to see these more human,
relatable sides of history.
Yeah, it reminds us that even people from vastly different times and cultures share many of the same desires and motivations.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Now that we've debunked the hygiene myth and discovered their love of poetry, I'm really curious to learn more about the Viking women.
Okay.
Were they just as into fashion and grooming?
Absolutely. The article highlights how Viking women were also very fashion conscious.
Okay.
And played a big role in maintaining these cultural standards of beauty and hygiene.
All right, spill the details.
Okay, so no braided beards for the ladies.
Right.
But they did have their own elaborate hairstyles, often with braids and ornaments.
Okay.
And remember those grooming tools we talked about?
Yeah.
Those were used by both men and women. Tweezers, combs, ear scoops, the whole 9 yards.
So basically, the Viking beauty routine was a family affair.
It seems so.
That's amazing.
And just like the men, Viking women also used lye soap. So they were probably lightening their hair as well.
It really challenges the idea that women caring about their appearance is a modern concept.
Yeah.
Clearly, it's been going on for centuries.
That's a great point. It makes you wonder how many other historical assumptions we've made about women and their roles in society.
Exactly.
But all this talk about grooming and fashion, was it just about vanity?
Well, it's important to remember that their focus on appearance wasn't necessarily about vanity.
Okay.
In the way that we might think about it today.
Right.
It was more about expressing their identity, their belonging, and status within their culture.
So it was like their well-groomed look was a way of saying, hey, I'm a Viking and I'm proud of it.
Exactly. And it's interesting to think about how that connects to our own grooming habits today.
Right.
We might choose certain hairstyles, clothing, or makeup to project an image or fit in with a certain group.
Yeah, I guess we're not so different from those stylish Vikings after all.
I guess not.
We all want to look good and present ourselves in a certain way. But of course, true beauty goes beyond just appearances.
Absolutely. And this is where it gets even more interesting.
Okay.
Vikings weren't just focused on outward beauty.
Right.
They also valued inner qualities like strength, courage, and loyalty.
So they were the whole package.
Yeah.
Strong, brave, loyal, and stylish to boot.
Precisely. And those qualities were celebrated in their poetry and storytelling.
Yeah.
Remember those poems about love and loss? They provide a glimpse into the Viking soul.
Yeah.
Revealing their deep emotions and capacity for love, humor, and even self-deprecation.
It's fascinating how we often try to box historical figures into neat categories.
Right.
Warrior, poet, lover.
Yeah.
But the reality is usually much more complex.
It is.
And multifaceted.
Yeah.
Vikings were all of those things and more.
Exactly. And that's what makes studying history so engaging.
Yeah.
It's about uncovering the layers of complexity and challenging our own preconceived notions.
I love that.
Me too.
That's great.
Yeah. It really is remarkable when you think about it. The Vikings were a people who embodied both strength and sensitivity, pragmatism and artistry.
It's a great reminder that history is full of surprises.
Right.
And we shouldn't let stereotypes limit our understanding of the past.
Absolutely.
But speaking of surprises, I'm curious to learn more about the role of women in Viking society.
Okay.
We've touched on their grooming practices.
Right.
But what else can you tell us about their lives?
Well, it's important to remember that Viking society, like many ancient cultures, was patriarchal.
Okay.
Men held positions of authority.
Right.
And women's lives were largely defined by their roles as wives and mothers.
Right.
However,
okay,
Viking women had more agency and independence compared to women in some other cultures at the time.
Interesting. What kind of agency are we talking about?
Well, for one, they could own property and businesses.
Wow.
They could also inherit wealth.
Okay.
And even divorce their husbands under certain circumstances.
So they weren't just confined to the home.
Not at all. They were active participants in their communities.
Okay.
And contributed to the economic and social fabric of Viking life.
That's really fascinating.
Yeah.
I'm starting to see why the article calls them the pretty boys of the Middle Ages.
Yeah.
Clearly the Vikings, both men and women, challenged a lot of our preconceived notions about what it meant to be a barbarian.
Exactly. And when you think about it, their emphasis on grooming might have been a way of pushing back against those very stereotypes.
Interesting.
By presenting themselves as well-groomed and stylish,
Right.
they were subverting the image of the uncivilized savage that others might have projected onto them.
So their meticulous grooming was a way of asserting their identity and sophistication.
It's certainly a possibility. Remember, the Vikings were known for their trading and raiding expeditions.
Right.
They interacted with diverse cultures and peoples. Presenting a polished and put-together image might have given them an advantage in those interactions.
That makes a lot of sense. It's like they were saying, we might be fierce warriors, but we're also cultured and sophisticated.
Precisely. And don't forget,
Right.
grooming wasn't just about appearances for the Vikings.
Okay.
It was also tied to their beliefs about health and well-being.
Right.
Remember, Lurgard, or washing day, was a weekly ritual.
Yeah.
They believed that cleanliness was important for both physical and spiritual health.
So it wasn't just about looking good.
Right.
It's also about feeling good
Uh-huh.
and maintaining a connection to the divine.
That's right. And this holistic approach to well-being
Yeah.
might be another reason why the Anglo-Saxons were so impressed,
Right.
or perhaps even scandalized by the Vikings' bathing habits.
Yeah.
Their own approach to hygiene,
Right.
influenced by early Christian beliefs, was much more austere.
You have to wonder what the Vikings would think of our modern obsession with cleanliness and self-care.
I know, right?
Would they be impressed by our elaborate skincare routines and fitness regimens?
It's an intriguing question. Perhaps they would see it as a continuation of their own traditions. A sign that we haven't forgotten the importance of taking care of ourselves, both inside and out.
And who knows?
Yeah.
Maybe they would even approve of our modern-day interpretations of their hairstyles.
Right.
Braids and top knots are definitely having a moment right now.
That's true. It seems the Viking influence can still be felt even in our fashion choices.
Yeah.
It's a testament to the enduring power of their aesthetic
Right.
and their ability to transcend time and inspire us even today.
Well, I, for one, am feeling inspired to embrace my inner Viking.
Good.
Maybe a trip to the salon is in order.
Maybe so.
But before I get carried away, I want to circle back to something we discussed earlier.
Okay.
Viking poetry.
Ah, yes, their love of words.
Yeah.
What would you like to delve deeper into?
We talked about how love was a popular theme, but what other topics did they write about? Did they have, like, epic poems about their battles and heroes?
Absolutely. Viking poetry encompassed a wide range of themes, from heroic tales of bravery and adventure to poignant reflections on loss, fate, and the human condition.
Wow.
Their poems offer a window into their values, beliefs, and worldviews.
So these poems weren't just entertaining stories.
Right.
They were also a way of transmitting cultural knowledge and preserving their history.
Precisely. Think of them as their version of historical records, religious texts, and even philosophical treatises.
Wow.
All woven together in verse.
That's fascinating, and I imagine their poetry also played a role in their social gatherings and celebrations.
We're absolutely right.
Yeah.
Poetry was an integral part of Viking social life.
Okay.
Imagine a mead hall filled with warriors and their families,
Right.
gathered around a roaring fire, as a skilled poet recites tales of heroic deeds and mythical gods.
That sounds pretty epic.
It does, doesn't it?
I can almost picture it now.
Yeah.
Were these poems always performed aloud? Did they have written versions as well?
That's a great question.
Yeah.
And it points to one of the challenges of studying Viking poetry.
Okay.
Much of what we know comes from oral traditions.
Right.
That were passed down through generations. Before eventually being written down centuries later.
So there's an element of mystery and interpretation involved in understanding these poems.
Absolutely. We can't be certain how accurately these written versions reflect the original oral performances. And even if we could, the meaning and significance of these poems might be lost on us.
Yeah.
Without a deeper understanding of the cultural context in which they were created.
That makes it, it's like trying to understand a joke from another culture.
Exactly.
You might get the words, but you might miss the nuances and underlying cultural references that make it funny.
Exactly. And that's why it's so important to approach Viking poetry.
Right.
And indeed, any historical source.
Yeah.
With a critical and open mind.
Okay.
We need to acknowledge the limitations of our understanding.
Right.
And be willing to consider multiple perspectives.
It's a reminder that history isn't just about facts and dates.
Right.
It's about interpretation and understanding the human experience across time and cultures.
Well said. And speaking of understanding the human experience,
yes,
I think it's time we revisited the topic of love and relationships in Viking society.
Okay.
After all, we did start this deep dive by talking about those well-groomed, irresistible Viking men.
Yes. Let's delve into the romantic side of Viking life.
Okay.
Was it all about wooing with poetry and good looks? Or were there more practical considerations at play when it came to love and marriage? All right, let's talk Viking romance. Was it all poetry and swooning over, well-groomed warriors?
Well, like most things in history, it was a bit of both.
Yeah.
Love and attraction certainly played a role. But practical considerations were also very important.
Okay. What kind of practical considerations are we talking about?
Well, think about the realities of life back then.
Right.
Marriage was often about forging alliances between families, securing resources, and ensuring the continuation of the family line.
So it wasn't always about, finding your soulmate.
Not necessarily.
Okay.
While love matches certainly existed,
right,
marriage was often seen as a strategic partnership.
Yeah.
As much as a romantic union.
That makes sense.
Yeah.
It's easy to forget that marriage hasn't always been about romantic love.
Right.
So how did these arranged marriages work?
No.
Did families just decide who their children would marry?
Exactly.
Okay.
Parents and family members played a significant role in choosing marriage partners.
Okay.
Taking into account factors like social status,
right,
wealth, and family connections.
So, the goal was to create a match that would benefit both families?
Exactly.
It sounds a bit like a business transaction.
It could be, yeah.
Was there any room for the couple's own feelings in this process?
There was some room for negotiation.
Okay.
And the couple's opinions were sometimes considered. But ultimately, the decision rested with the families.
I imagine that could lead to some unhappy couples.
I'm sure it did sometimes.
Were there any ways out of an arranged marriage if things didn't work out?
Surprisingly, Viking society allowed for divorce.
Really?
Under certain circumstances.
Okay, like what?
For example, a woman could divorce her husband if he mistreated her.
Right.
Or failed to provide for her.
So Viking women had some degree of autonomy within marriage.
They did.
Interesting.
It's important to remember that Viking women, while still subject to patriarchal structures,
right,
enjoyed more rights and freedoms than women in many other cultures of that era.
This is really challenging my perceptions of Viking society.
It is fascinating, isn't it?
It seems much more complex.
It is.
And nuanced than the simplistic barbarian image often portrayed.
I agree.
And that complexity is reflected in their attitudes towards love and relationships.
Absolutely.
Yes, they valued strength and bravery, but they also celebrated love, loyalty, and companionship. And let's not forget their appreciation for a good grooming routine.
Absolutely. Personal appearance played a role in courtship and attraction, just like it does today.
Of course.
Remember those poems about Ingolf?
Yeah.
And his popularity with the ladies?
Right.
Clearly, charm and good looks were appreciated.
So they were just as concerned with matters of the heart.
It seems so.
Or with raiding and conquering.
Indeed. And their stories And poems offer us a glimpse into their emotional lives, their hopes, their dreams, and their desires.
Yeah.
They remind us that despite the vast differences in time and culture, we share a common human experience.
Yeah. It's amazing how these seemingly small details, like hairstyles and grooming habits, can reveal so much about a culture.
It's true. Sometimes the most mundane aspects of daily life can offer the most profound insights into the past.
Well, I think we've covered a lot of ground today.
We have.
We've debunked myths, explored the complexities of Viking society, and even learned a thing or two about love and marriage in the Viking Age.
It's been a fascinating journey.
It has.
And I hope it's encouraged our listeners to question their assumptions.
Yeah.
And look beyond the stereotypes to discover the richness and complexity of history.
Absolutely. So to our listeners, we challenge you to continue exploring and discovering.
Yes.
The past is full of surprises, and there's always more to learn.
That's right.
And who knows, maybe you'll even be inspired to add a little Viking flair to your own grooming routine.
Why not?
On that note,
yeah,
we'll bid you farewell for now.
Thank you for listening.
Thanks for joining us on The Deep Dive.